We're learning about the future of the race circuit from an environmental and developmental point of view. So I'm going to invite my esteemed colleagues for this. From Populous, the director Mike Trice, Driven International's managing director Ben WILLSHIRE, and for Motorsport Services International, Bob Barnard. Well, gentlemen, welcome to our stage. Thank you very much for taking busy time out of your schedules to join us. First of all, Mike Trice, tell us a little bit about what it is that you do in the world of motorsport from a circuit development point of view.
So we are designers of sports venues across all sports. So we design Olympic stadiums, football stadiums, we run Super Bowl, we design basketball stadiums, just about every sport. We understand how fans work, what they want. Throughout the last 10 years, 520 million people have visited our venues and experienced our stadia and arenas and temporary venues. And globally, we've put in 18 million spectator seats. An example of our work is this building. We designed Silverstone Wing and a reconfiguration of the circuit here. So we come at this problem from the fan engagement perspective. We're interested in live experiences for fans, and that's our interest in the future of motorsport.
So Mike is very much one of the motivating factors is obviously the fans, as you've mentioned, and I think we all agree the work that's been done to this facility has absolutely transformed the circuit. It's amazing, a wonderful facility to work at. Turning to you, Ben, obviously in your enterprise as the man behind Driven International, we've crossed paths many, many times before, but when I spoke to you about this 2 or 3 years ago, this was your new passion. You really wanted to delve into this side of the sport. How has it gone?
Yeah, no, we've had an exciting 2 or 3 years growing the business. We get involved in everything from designing brand new racetracks, whether that be for go-karting all the way up to Formula One level, but also we're expanding out now, looking at anything driving related. We're finding, a lot of people now looking to build new driving facilities, whether that's taking an airfield and turning it into a supercar event, or whether it's building an experience centre for a manufacturer. So anything driving related, we're seeing a big growth in that area, especially as now the vehicles and the way automotive is transforming, and obviously the way that fans are engaging with the sport. So we're adapting all the time in terms of what we're designing. But it's been a great journey the last 2 or 3 years. Thank you.
No problem. It's been great to see your endeavours grow.
Thanks.
Bob, I have to say, what you don't know about motor racing circuit development probably isn't worth talking about, but we could spend days going through your history and what you've given to the world of motorsport. For those who are unaware, what sort of projects have you had your hand in over the last few years?
Over the last few years, I've been living and working in America. I've recently moved to Spain, but most of the projects I've done in the last few years are the sort of thing that Ben's talking about. They're tracks that are non-spectator tracks. They're purely for drivers. And I'll show some photos of what we've done. But basically, it's an experience type track. In America, if you look at NASCAR and IndyCar and those series, their attendance is going down and down and down. What's happening and what the business is turning into, and the business only makes some sense, is to go to like a country club model, which is the same as a golf course, where you buy a membership, you can go and drive your car in a safe environment and enjoy your car that you can't do on the road. And then the other one I've done recently is SpeedVegas, which is the sort of the next level, where you don't even need to have the car. You can just go and rent a number of laps with a coach and drive a Lamborghini or a Porsche or Ferrari and experience it. And experience is the word. None of these tracks have any spectator seating or at all. They usually have a nice clubhouse or something like that, but it's all about experiencing the vehicle in a safe environment.
So it's a very intimate way of going about it. It's purely for the consumer. It's
purely for the consumer, yes, indeed. No one was going to dream to turn up and watch these guys do this. It is their own entertainment. That's what they're doing it for. And to my mind, that's where the future of the racetrack is going, apart from some major events like Le Mans. It's very much in America. It's about the experience, of personal experience with the car.
I'm glad you've touched on that, because my first question is mainly fan motivated, because of course you talked a little bit, Mike, about, you know, one of the main elements with the design of this wing was how to bring it a little bit closer to, you know, the pinnacle of the sport, how to engage the fans a little bit more with the sport. And, you know, I've hosted podium ceremonies on the podium behind us, and it really does bring the fans intimately closer to the sport. Is that one of the major engaging factors in how you design a circuit these days? Is it something that's, you know, particularly relevant for you?
Yeah, it's definitely about getting closer. If you come to a live event, you want to tell people about the fact you were there, you were close, you experienced it, you nearly touched it. Paddock Club is a perfect example. People want to see the cars up close, they want to see the drivers, so everything's about getting closer, and there's this whole business about exclusivity, the exclusive nature of being there and experiencing it, so that's what fans want, and we want to give them more.
I'll ask the same question to you, Ben, because it's a little bit different in terms of what you have done of late, but, you know, is there an element where it's important?
I think absolutely, and actually I was going to say that I think we can learn a lot from other sports. You know, Mike particularly, you know, Populous and his team working across, you know, soccer and, well, football as we call it here, and basketball, etc.
It's actually football.
Yeah, football, soccer, which one?
Keys in the
and I think, you know, I've been to some sporting events in the US, and it's just an amazing entertainment, you know, evening out. It is not just about the sport, and I think actually that's where, you know, we're seeing changes now in Formula One, and we're seeing changes with the way people are thinking about how they're designing these motor racing venues and engaging the fans. And I think the younger generation that we've got now are much more about quick, snappy content and accessibility, and I think that's why we're seeing rallycross growing so hugely popular, like, you know, the track here at Silverstone now, and I think that is an important element of it. There's a younger generation that are after quick, snappy content and accessibility, and I think that is important.
I'm going to ask you the same question, Bob, because you've been on both sides of the fence on this one. You've designed circuits purely for the fan experience and purely for the consumer, so is it an important factor?
Well, not in the clients I've dealt with lately. The last spectator track I worked on was actually 2004-05 when we rebuilt the infield of Daytona, very much for what Mike was talking about, because NASCAR went through this process of letting everybody into the paddock and then decided that was too dangerous, and they threw everybody out of the paddock. And then we came up with this fan zone concept whereby you could bring them in a controlled fashion. And the fan zone has been something that's been copied since. But that was the last spectator track. And if you look back in America, the last spectator track that's been built probably in the last 20 years is probably the Circuit of the Americas, which I don't know that the business model works very well for. So I'm very much more in terms of how does the person who comes to the track with their vehicle, or for instance, one of the tracks I just built was for Toyota Motor Company for their new headquarters in Dallas, and it was a track purely for their executives to go and drive their cars and their competitors' cars. And for me as a designer, it ends up being a very different challenge to try and design a track that is satisfying for those people and safe and gives the experience that you want, as opposed to the fan. So, you know, what I've been doing lately is totally non-fan. There's no, as I say, there's not a spectator in sight.
I think it depends, you know, as designers, our job is to deliver what your client is ultimately trying to achieve. So if they're building a venue that's based around an event-based ticket sales event, you have to think about the spectators. If you're building a track that's for a car manufacturer to sell cars and demonstrate technology, you think about it in a different way. It's more about what the track is doing and the experience in the car. So I think it depends who you're working for, and I think across all of us are working on different types of projects. You have to think about it in a different way depending on what the brief is.
Very different starting a race circuit purely from scratch to host MotoGP compared to setting up a city for Formula E, for example.
Exactly.
So on that front, I suppose, Mike, this is an appropriate question considering how much work has gone into Silverstone and obviously the fans being one of the factors. How does the design of a circuit evolve to improve the fan experience? What changes? I mean, we've obviously seen this facility adapt and improve over the course of the last 10 years. I mean, what other things come into a circuit design that improve the fan experience?
So, I mean, it's simple things like grouping grandstands where there's action, and when you group grandstands, you try and create almost a stadium feel, so there's atmospheres boosted, the drivers are enhanced by the crowd are enhanced by the drivers. But then when you do that, you cluster the grandstands and make sure you look after the fans that are there, so make sure they've got decent welfare facilities, make sure there's activity when there's no action on the race near that cluster of spectator terraces, and so just look after the fans. And the problem with motorsport now and over recent years is that you look at football and what you get as a fan in football. You get loads of information about what's going on, you get a covered roof, you get all sorts of different hospitality offers. And you go to motorsport and you go to Spa, which is probably the best circuit in the world, and you're treated like nobody. You know, there's nothing. There's no arrival experience. There's no seats. But you know, it's a fantastic walk in the park, but it's not a spectator event particularly.
I guess one of the biggest challenges, Bob, is that, you know, as broadcast technology develops, you know, the coverage of motor racing is far better now than it was, say, 30, 40 years ago.
Oh, God, yes.
The television programs are obviously showing all of the action around the circuit as it happens. It must be difficult to adapt to that and evolve so that the fan finds value in attending the race circuit to sit at one part of the track to get the experience when they could just stay at home and watch it. I mean, that must be one heck of a challenge. Like you.
Like me.
That must be an amazing
living in
challenge.
Spain, I get a complete channel of Formula One and another channel of MotoGP. And I live in Barcelona, and people say, "You're going to go to Montmello for the Grand Prix?" And I say, "Hell no." Why? I mean, I can sit at home and see absolutely everything that's going on, like you say, instead of one piece, even with big screen TVs, and I mean, lots of things have been tried, but I'm the biggest fan of all, and I don't actually go to a track if I can help it, because you know, the problem of getting to the track and getting into the parking lot, you know, sitting and seeing one piece and sort of all the rest of it, and you're there all day, and then you've got to go through the process to get home. And so I'm a bit jaundiced, if you like, in my view, is that the future is for, especially when you start talking about electric and autonomous driving vehicles, it's like, why would anybody go to the track? And especially when you get people like Liberty who are driving to give the fans a better experience on any handheld device anywhere, you'd have to start saying, why would you go to the track? You know, as like says, Spa is one of the best tracks in the world, certainly my favourite track, but I wouldn't go to Spa. My wife would love to go to Spa, but I keep telling her, you know, it's hideous in terms of a fan experience. You know, so yeah, I guess I'm the wrong person really to talk about fan experience, because I'm a great fan, but my best experience is sitting at home in front of the TV with a glass of red and watching far more than I'm ever going to get at a racetrack.
So, Mike, how do we adapt to that challenge then, as everybody wants to, you know, engage with the digital technology on their mobile phones and on their tablets to watch the races? How do we then tap into that technology or adapt as a sport so that people still come through the gate? Yeah,
so the point, I mean, you know, we're dealing with a different type of audience now. So we've got to give people all that data, all that information live at the track and more. You've got to give them stuff that you can't get at home. So you get that unique experience. And there's all sorts of other things that can be done at tracks, like don't sit in one seat, you know, allow the spectators to move from grandstand to grandstand. So while you're at the race, take in all the corners, you know, so, and then if you get sponsors to sponsor each corner, there's a different experience, there's a different activation. One will be sponsored by Red Bull, so they sort of enhance your experience of that corner by activating with Red Bull's product. And then you go somewhere else and it's a different offer. So mobilising the fans, getting them to experience more of the track is one thing. Other things like, you know, if you watch a motorsport crowd, 80% have got a camera in front of their eye, so they're experiencing it through a camera lens. And that's because the fans are into technology, they're into that type of thing. So enhance that, you know, give people with cameras a slightly elevated view, capture the photos on Instagram, and then, you know, the best photo wins a track to the next, a race ticket to the next track, something like that. So it's just treating fans differently, giving them more engagement with them more, and giving them something unique. And there's definitely something massive about being part of a crowd and experience the thing with other humans. You know, if we all watch live sport from TVs, it's just it's not the same. You know, if everybody watched the World Cup from their bedrooms, it's just not the same thing. You have to experience stuff together as humans.
I completely agree. I mean, I've been watching the Le Mans 24 Hours for a few years now, and it wasn't until I actually got into the pits in 2016 that you realise what the event is actually about. You have to experience it firsthand. And I guess the onus is on us to a certain degree, Ben, to engage with the fan as circuit designers, as promoters, as a sport as a whole, to make that experience more inviting. I guess we need to make sure that the people are coming through the gate for the right reason.
Yeah, and I think we see, you know, our job usually, the reason that we are approached generally when we do projects is because we have an expertise in how to lay out the circuit, how to make it safe, how to make it exciting to drive. But actually, I think our job as designers is actually looking at the whole venue. You know, when we worked with Silverstone here on the Rallycross, there was a whole piece around what is the event. It's not just a Rallycross race. And that resulted in then the Speed Machine Festival being born, where we had, you know, evening music with Dizzy Rascal, we had street food, we had cars on display using the circuit, we had then the Rallycross event itself, which was the World Championship. And I think that you know, reading some of the comments and feedback that we've received, that drew in a lot of new people to come and watch something that they would never have come to watch just the Rallycross. But the fact that they've got other experiences and other events going on, I think that's actually a way forward for other championships and other series to learn from. You know, having fan zones and activation zones, as you're saying. But again, it comes back to if that is the reason for the circuit being there, then you have to maximise it with those types of activities and engagements. But as Bob said, you know, it's then if you're building something just for a car manufacturer, they're not going to do those types of events. But certainly, I think for spectator events, the way forward is the more kind of looking at it more as a festival rather than just a race event.
Well, Bob, you can speak with some authority on this, because we were talking earlier on today about what you described as the Woodstock of MotoGP events, and that's Phillip Island, where it's so remote but such a beautiful circuit that basically the fans had no alternative but to be there for 3 or 4 days camping with, you know, the festival atmosphere, the music and everything. That's, I guess, the kind of best way to really bring the fans back to it, to give it back to them.
Well, there's two ways, and just to touch on what Mike was saying, one of the things I did with Phillip Island, which was a famous old track that broken down, was to make sure you could actually walk all the way around it. Before you could walk only part of it, and then you get annoyed and walk back. So we did that. And the other thing I found out is that motorcycle fans, don't like sitting in grandstands, because I built a lot of grandstands and they didn't want to do that. They wanted to do exactly what Mike said, was walk around and look at it from different places. And yes, we turned it. We had concerts and you know, we turned it into a complete festival because of where it was. I put nearly 250,000 people through a racetrack 2 hours out of Melbourne with one bridge to get to it. It's like the Isle of Man. But in essence, what really makes Phillip Island is the quality of the racing. Right? That, you know, you can get to people to come to an event for the first time because of hype or whatever. But if the racing is not good, and that gets back to Ben's statement about how you build the track. The thing with Phillip Island, and I watched the race this last weekend, and I was still astounded, and I'm the guy who built it, at the quality of the racing. Because that is what, in the end, brings the fan back to that experience that Mike's talking about, is to get that excitement. And so, unfortunately, what we're seeing in lots of racing these days is too much of a procession. We've lost the focus. That it's about the race, stupid. You know what I mean? That in the end, we can do everything we like about making grandstands, and I think, you know, if you think about NASCAR, and I don't want to take over this whole thing, NASCAR went from a total top of the crest of the wave in 2004, where they couldn't build seats fast enough, and 14 years later they can't fill a stadium. In fact, they're actually physically taking seats out of their stadium. And yet they're building bigger and bigger screens, they're doing all the things that you think you should do, but it won't stop the rot. Because in the end, the fans don't see what's going on the track, wrongly I think, but they just don't see there. Some of the heroes have gone, you know, they think it's too processional, et cetera, et cetera. So, but it is, to me, if we're going to do something for the fans, the race has got to be what it's about.
I'm interested that you touched on NASCAR because we've got a very acute and very poignant case study at the moment in British motorsport, which is the demise of Rockingham, which is now sadly going to be closing its doors in a few weeks for the last time. Now, Mike, I suppose on paper...
As a racetrack.
Oh, yes.
It's closing its doors as a
racetrack. Very true. I wonder, Mike, when you look at a place like that where on paper, the concept it was designed for, it fulfilled its purpose. It came here for champ cars for 2 years, lay dormant after that, and then more car racing came to it and bike racing came to it, but it's never really been able to get back that same elan that it had in the mid-2000s. But on paper, all the facilities were there to get it done. I mean, it was all encompassed in one bowl. The grandstand facilities, you could see the whole circuit. It must be quite an interesting, expose into how to get it wrong when on paper everything looked like it was doing it right.
Yeah, I agree. Slightly. I mean, I don't think the British motorsport fan really took to that type of racing particularly, and then similar time you've got Nigel Mansell going over there and blitzing the American race series with Formula One driving talent. So I don't know whether the two are related, but there's a bit of just a problem with bringing that type of racing to Europe. I think that's probably the issue there. That would be, I mean, I don't know, some things are transportable, some aren't. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how NFL works over here. I mean, that's very popular at the moment. I don't know whether they've captured the audience quite as well as they could have done, but yeah, as you say, everything was there, the kit of parts was there, but it's just not really worked.
I guess, Ben, it sort of serves as a stark reminder in a way. I mean, when everything is so difficult anyway logistically to run an operation like this, to design an operation, to put it into place, to make sure it runs as an effective business as well as a sporting leisure facility, it must be quite a very stark reminder of just how difficult it can be and how challenging it is to be on top of the game.
Absolutely. I mean, so most of the tracks we design for racing are usually aimed at sort of what we call a grade 2 or grade 3 level, which is to host international events or national events, but not major events, whereas, obviously Silverstone here is designed more for Formula One and MotoGP. So our clients that we're working for are always looking at every penny in terms of, okay, if we're putting in a grandstand, we have to justify how that's going to be operated 365 days a year. So there's always this trade-off and balance when we're talking to customers and going through, okay, what is it you want to do with your circuit? What are you going to use it for? We have to go through what events are you going to hold? How many people are you expecting at a peak? But actually, that's just one weekend a year. So really the way we're looking at things is what are you going to do for the other 360 days? And so we'll look at things like, okay, let's use the grass bunding as spectator berms. And we'll use them as noise protection and spectator berms, and then all of a sudden it can start to make sense, because from a monetary perspective, you're putting money into a circuit that you're not having empty facilities day to day, and that's probably the biggest challenge actually for a race circuit operator, is balancing having a venue that can cope with a big event versus 360-day a year operation, and we know that's a challenge here at Silverstone. Hence events like this.
Challenge,
yeah. I'm aware that we have limited time, but there is one thing that I do want to touch on briefly, and it's one of the things that's fascinated me as a broadcaster and a commentator. There's one particular championship that is a stark reminder to me of how fickle the motorsport fan is when it comes to circuits, and that's the European Supercar Championship. They have a round here in the UK at Donington Park, where there's very few spectators that attend it. The racing is no different, and it's definitely not dull, but it's difficult to fill a set of grandstands. It's difficult to get people through the door. The next round of the championship after that is in Assen in Holland. Yeah. And as you can imagine, 85,000 people turn up and they go absolutely ballistic. But the championship isn't any different. It's the same series. So I guess, Bob, it's a bit of a challenge. Is there a bit of an onus maybe on the British market? Is it purely down to one country, remembering and needing a reminder that motor racing is here, that we need to get people back through the door again, or is it different to the different cultures that we're working with?
Well, it's definitely different cultures, and getting back to what Mike was saying, if you've been to Assen, you'd be, I went there a long time ago and it was barbaric, so it isn't about the quality of the fan experience, it is about cultures. I was in Imola recently talking to them about historic racing, and they said that, strangely enough, they thought the younger generation didn't really care at all about historic racing, whereas in England and America, it's huge.
Doing it, yeah.
So there is a huge cultural thing going on, and there is a sea change going on. Mike touched on it, that the younger generation doesn't have the same affinity for cars. And it sort of goes against a bit what I talked about, is that, the quality of the car racing is terrific, so why don't people go and watch it? I don't know. From a promoter's point of view, maybe he hasn't put the effort into letting people know it's on. That's easy to say. But it is, and getting back to what Ben's saying, that's one of the hardest things to really balance. It's not our jobs as track designers just to go off and build a piece of asphalt. It's to do the holistic piece that says, how do they get in, what do they experience when they get there, and how's the guy going to make any money? Because if he doesn't make any money, there isn't any point and there isn't any future, like we talked about. So there's this incredible balance going on in terms of, how do we satisfy the fan? How do we spend this money? But how do we make money in the end? And there is no easy solution. So I don't know how to answer your question, why it works in Assen and why it doesn't. Maybe the Dutch have a world champion, do they?
I think we have so much choice here in the UK of events. You've got British Superbike, British touring cars, GT racing, Formula 1. There's so much going on every weekend as a motorsport fan that you can go
to everything.
Exactly, and I think maybe in Assen they have a certain amount of events in a very localised area. I think it's more of I don't think it's a track-related issue. I think that's a promotional issue, and maybe they need to get Dizzy Rascal along. That'll do the job.
You can't be that expensive. Last question, because I know we're tight to time, but last question, and this is one that comes up a lot, particularly for the Formula One fan, and it's to do with the British Grand Prix being here at Silverstone. I'll start with you, Mike, on this one. Because of the way that the business model has to work for a race circuit year-round, is it worth Silverstone running the British Grand Prix, even if it were to come as a financial loss? Because this has been debated a lot in the press, it's been debated through up and down the realms of motorsport. Is it genuinely financially worth it if the Grand Prix comes at a loss to run it?
It's their business, but I mean, if it's... I would say yes, because it's the whole icon of it's the home of the British Grand Prix. It's what Silverstone is. There's two things that identify Silverstone: it's this building, the icon, and the fact that it's the home of the British Grand Prix. So without that, it's an airfield that has the odd race.
Yes.
It's utterly important.
Ben, your thoughts on this?
I think you have to look at who's funding that. I mean, obviously the British Grand Prix at the moment, that's a private event, that's a Silverstone event. If that can't wash its face, then from a business perspective, you have to look at it and say, well, actually, does it make sense for me as a circuit owner? And eventually, if you can't sustain that, then obviously, as much as I do agree in terms of the icon and the heritage of the event, putting sort of from a business perspective, it doesn't make sense. However, I think that's where we need to look at the whole industry. What motorsport brings to the UK, all the jobs, the teams, and that's where I think we need to get either a position where there's some support there to make that happen, or there's, I'm sure there's an agreement that's going to be reached between Silverstone and Formula One to make it viable. As it is, clearly it isn't.
Well, it's always interested me because the British Grand Prix is the one race in the Formula One calendar that doesn't receive any government funding. So I think it's always a very difficult challenge, Bob. What are your thoughts on this one?
Well, as a promoter that's gone bankrupt doing this, my thoughts are that no, it's not worth. If you're not making money on it, why are you doing it? The only reason you're doing it is for prestige, to say we've got the British Grand Prix. And prestige doesn't buy much in the store to feed. And so, I mean, it's a terrible answer to say, but in truth, it's not. And as Ben says, if there needs to be a British Grand Prix, then someone's got to cut it some slack from Liberty, or the government's got to put some money in, because what you're competing in, it's a competing business. There's loads of people around the world who want Formula One races, right? There are only so many weekends a year, and if there are governments like Abu Dhabi and Bahrain and Baku lining up to throw money at it for pure prestige and nothing else, then how do you compete in that business, right? So, I don't know, you've got the facility, like what else are you going to do with it? But it doesn't make any financial sense to drive yourself into bankruptcy just for the sake of doing it. And I carried on 2 years way past I should have ever said I give up through sheer, ignorance and willpower. And I never wanted to give up. But, there comes a point where common sense says you can't keep doing this if you get the same answer.
This is a fascinating subject, and I wish we had more time to delve into it more, but I'm sure all three of the gentlemen up here will have questions answered if you have them. It's a fascinating element of the sport. I love engaging in it, and I hope to more with the three of you in the future. I really appreciate your time to come and join us. Thank you very much indeed to Mike Trice, to Ben Wilshire, and to Bob Barnard. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks.